Unleash your inner Titan. Decrypting the master code of fear. What if I told you that everything that paralyzes you today has a solution? That the fear you feel is inherently yours. It's learned. That your mind isn't broken, merely programmed to doubt its own colossal power? This book doesn't come bearing empty platitudes or hollow promises. It arrives to show you, word by potent word, how to uplift and uproot the fear that sabotages your very essence, replacing it with an invincible faith. Here, we won't heal slowly. We will awaken suddenly, explosively. If you are utterly exhausted from living with the brakes on, brace yourself, because after this, you will never be the same again. And that, precisely, is your ultimate necessity. Fear, the unseen master. What if I told you that every decision you've ever made, the ones you celebrate, the ones you regret, and even the ones you simply sidestepped, were dictated by a master you never saw? Would you believe me? If I asked you why you didn't pursue what your heart yearned for, why you silenced your soul scream, why you hid when the moment demanded your emergence, what would you answer? Because I, too, was once there. And if you're reading this, perhaps you stand on that very precipice now. It wasn't a lack of opportunity, nor an absence of talent, nor some predetermined fate. It was fear, a silent, elegant fear, cleverly disguised as common sense, prudence, or even humility. Fear possesses the voice of your parents, your teachers, your partner, the news, your very childhood. And its greatest talent? It leaves no visible trace, only devastating results. Procrastination, insecurity, low self-esteem, crippling dependency. It is the unseen master, operating from within, pulling your strings without your awareness. The first truth I unearthed wasn't how to conquer it, but how to recognize it, because no one can vanquish what they cannot perceive. And fear doesn't manifest as a roaring monster. It hides and whispers like, "It's not the right time, maybe later, I'm not good enough yet, what if I fail?" But as a wise man who transformed my life once said, fear is a state of mind, and you can control your mind. Have you ever questioned how many times fear tricked you into believing you were making the choice, when in reality, you were merely obeying? Because not everything you perceive as truth is truth. Sometimes what you label as realism is just fear in a business suit. Sometimes what you call humility is fear disguised as virtue. And what you label as faith in God is simply fear of trusting yourself. Fear doesn't just hold you back. It convinces you that it's safer to endure suffering than to attempt liberation. Fear is so cunning it doesn't whisper you'll fail. It tells you it's simply not the right time for you to triumph. And you believe it, just as I believed it for years. I told myself it was better to stay busy than to launch myself into what I truly loved, better to have a secure job than to bet on my dreams. I convinced myself it was better to avoid rejection than to risk shining. But one day, during my darkest night, a profound realization struck me. If I continue to obey fear, my entire life will be a creation. And I was not born for that. It was then that I decided to observe it, not fight it, to observe it like a scientist studying a virus. Today, I've discovered that fear has patterns, habits, predictable reactions. It emerges when you're about to speak in public, when you're about to speak your truth, when you're about to ask for forgiveness, when you're about to take a risk, when you're about to ask for help. It flares up when your soul stretches beyond its known limits. And paradoxically, its very presence signifies that you are moving towards something profoundly valuable. So, I began to use it as a compass. If something instilled fear, yet simultaneously felt expansive, it was a signal that I must do it. As one of my mentors wisely stated, dare to fail because that means you are trying. The alternative isn't safety, it's surrender. And how do you conquer fear? You don't conquer it. You replace it. You replace it with burning desire, with faith in life, with a crystal clear vision. Fear cannot endure the fire of purpose. It cannot survive in the presence of an ignited will. Here, a brutal lesson comes into play. Desire, fear equals action. Fear plus excuses equals paralysis. Desire must transcend fear, not because fear vanishes, but because you no longer let it steer your ship, because you make decisions from a place of desire, not paralysis. I started writing, even if my hands trembled. I started speaking. Even if I doubted, I confronted my shames. Even if I wept, every small act, every courageous action taken in the presence of fear gradually weakened its grip, not because it made it disappear, but because I was shifting my source of authority from the voice of fear to the voice of my truth. As Brian Tracy aptly states, fear evaporates when you take action. And it's true. Fear doesn't die in the mind. It dies in movement. It dies when you make the call, when you record the video, when you raise your hand, when you say no, when you get back up again. Fear thrives in paralysis, in justification, in delay. But the moment you move, even if trembling, you break its hold, not with violence, but with truth, not with shouts, but with decisive action. And this was the hardest truth I unearthed. Fear also protected me. It wasn't the enemy, but a part of me that didn't know how to live without pain, that believed suffering was safer than advancing. I had to sit with it, listen to it, embrace it, and tell it, thank you for protecting me until now, but I no longer need that protection. Now I need to advance, not hide. I no longer seek mere security. I crave freedom, and there I began to liberate myself from my own self-made prison. The unveiling, how to spot your unseen master. So, how will you know if fear still governs your life? It's simple. Observe what you are avoiding, what you postpone, what you make excuses for, what you tell yourself you'll do someday. There precisely resides your unseen master. There precisely is a program still dictating how you live. But what you avoid is very likely what would truly set you free. Every single thing that makes you feel small is showing you the magnitude of your repressed truth. Every fear is a closed door, and every closed door, a destiny unlived. You don't need to be fearless to open it. You just need to be more exhausted by captivity than by risk. I speak to you this way because I have no time to be gentle with what is destroying you. Because I know what it's like to watch life pass by, waiting for the perfect moment. I know what it's like to silence the fire in your throat. I know what it's like to want to scream that you can do more, but not yet truly believe it. And so I tell you, fear is the unseen master, but you can resign from its service. You don't need to eliminate it. Simply stop obeying it. Don't elevate it to a god. Don't listen to it as if it were wise. Don't grant it a seat in your decision-making. Ask yourself right now, who are you obeying when you choose not to act? Who is making your decisions? Your courageous self or your fearful self? Which version of you signed that contract with mediocrity? The one who wants to live or the one who merely wants to survive? Tell me, to which part of yourself are you being loyal every time you procrastinate? Because this isn't just about fear. It's about identity, about peace, about fidelity to a version of yourself you no longer wish to be. When you achieve this, not all at once, but step by brave step, you will experience something that initially feels unreal. Peace. It's a peace that doesn't come from avoiding problems, but from no longer betraying yourself. And then, fear will no longer be master. It will be a signal, a guide, an echo of the past that still lives in your body, but no longer in your will. Today, I'm not here to tell you not to have fear. I'm here to tell you that you can live with it without obeying it, that you can walk beside it without granting it the final word, that you can tremble and still do it. Because that is true courage. Action in the presence of fear, not absence of fear. Action, movement, decision, power. And if you've made it this far, I want you to close your eyes for a second and recall all the times you weren't truly yourself. All the times you chose safety. You silenced your truth, not to judge yourself, but so you can decide once and for all, will you continue to feed that unseen master, or will you liberate yourself? Because if fear still directs your life, then your life isn't truly yours. And you didn't come here to obey. You came to create, to transform, to lead your inner world. Don't wait for another lifetime to do it. This is the one that counts. This is yours. The perfect camouflage, doubt. Initially, I didn't recognize it. It seemed like a wise, prudent, almost protective voice. It told me, it's not the right time. You need more preparation. What if it doesn't work out? What will you do then? I listened to it as if it were an inner mentor, believing it was common sense. But over time, when I saw that this voice appeared every time I was about to make a courageous decision, I understood its true identity. It was fear disguised. It didn't yell, didn't push, didn't insult me. It whispered softly in my ear and stopped me. Its most effective camouflage is called doubt. Doubt is fear's most elegant trap. The devil doesn't push you into the abyss. He convinces you to stay on the edge, merely observing. He makes you think you're reflecting when in reality, you're paralyzed. He makes you believe you're being strategic when in reality, you're being dominated. Doubt is fear's most intellectual disguise, and if you don't identify it in time, it will steal your entire life. I wasn't afraid to act. I had doubts, and that's why I didn't act. It's easier to admit you have doubts than to admit you have fear. But what we call doubt is, at its core, a lack of faith in ourselves. And where does that lack of faith come from? From years of obeying others, from years of failing and punishing ourselves, from years of feeding a broken image of what we believe we deserve. One day, I asked myself, do I doubt because there's something truly dangerous, or do I doubt because I don't trust myself? The answer was clear and it hurt. I doubt because I was taught to distrust my intuition. Because when I was a child, I was corrected for thinking differently, ridiculed for trying, punished for dreaming out loud. And now, as an adult, I carry that internalized judgment. As one of my mentors used to say, there's no worse enemy than the voice inside you that repeats what you were once made to believe. But that voice is called doubt. And if you don't confront it, you'll live with it as if it were your conscience. But it's not. It's just fear in disguise. And how is this problem solved? How do you unmask something that seems so logical? The key lies in what you are avoiding. Doubt appears just before the leap, just before the declaration, just before the new beginning. Doubt doesn't arise when you're still. It appears when you approach the edge of your expansion. That's its signal. Doubt doesn't attack the impossible. It attacks the possible that you're afraid might become real. Because if you succeed, you can no longer be who you were. And so I understood that my doubt wasn't fear of failure. It was fear of what success implied. Responsibility, visibility, change. Doubt protected me from my own greatness, keeping me in a zone where it was easy to complain but difficult to grow. And I had to decide. Either I lived doubt and feel secure, or I risked trusting what I didn't yet have proof of. And that's when faith emerged, not blind faith, but practical faith. One that is built with small decisions. As another life mentor would say, act as if it were impossible to fail. And that's what I did. Not because I knew it would work, but because I was tired of living under the reign of maybe. Today, I started doing small things that challenged that voice. I wrote the email I was afraid to send. I recorded the video I never dared to publish. I spoke to the person I've been avoiding for months. And guess what happened? I didn't die. I didn't break. I wasn't rejected as I imagined. Most of the time, reality was much gentler than the movie my doubt had projected. That's when I understood something. Doubt doesn't predict. IT invents. And you believe it. Have you ever wondered why you doubt yourself more than others? Why you give others the benefit of the doubt, but condemn yourself before you even start? Why do you believe you need more time, more titles, more validation to do what, deep down, you already know you should do? Because someone taught you that you weren't enough, and doubt is just that judgment walking with you. You don't need to eliminate it entirely. Just stop obeying it as if it were law. When it appears, ask it, what's the worst that can happen if I act? And then answer yourself, and what's the worst that can happen if I don't act? Most of the time, the harm of doing nothing is much greater than the possible error of trying. Someone once told me, but what if I make a mistake? And I replied, you correct, you learn, and you continue. But if you do nothing, you can't correct anything. You can only repeat the same empty loop with different names. That's what doubt is, an elegant repetition of the same deadlock. You can live 30 years doubting, believing you're thinking, but the mind doesn't think when it doubts. The mind spins, gets entangled, and then makes excuses. That's why you don't need more analysis. You need decision. The antidote to doubt isn't certainty. It's commitment. You decide to act, even if you don't know everything. You decide to move forward, even if you can't see clearly yet. Because if you wait for everything to clear up, Someone else will have already lived the life you hesitated to live. I am not special. I just got tired of obeying that voice and started writing my own rules. Rule 1. If my soul desires it, I try it. Rule 2. If I doubt it but it calls me, I explore it. Rule 3. If fear tells me no, at least once, I say yes. That was my internal revolution, not against the world, but against internal paralysis. And you can do the same. You don't need another course or another sign. Just look in the mirror and tell yourself with honesty, I'm doubting because I'm growing. I'm doubting because I'm stepping out of the known. I'm doubting because this version of me no longer wants to be a slave to the previous one. And if that's your truth, then this moment can be the beginning of your transformation. Not later, not tomorrow, but now. As you read this, as you breathe, as you decide to stop believing that voice that never led you anywhere new. Because the most tragic thing isn't to doubt. The most tragic thing is to heed doubt as if it were wisdom. It is not. Wisdom doesn't stop you. It guides you. Doubt is not a guide. It's a trap. Today, I invite you to do something big. Not necessarily grand, just different. That thing you've been postponing, do it. Not out of bravery, but out of loyalty to yourself, out of respect for your soul, out of dignity. Because within you, there's a version that no longer wants to live from what if, or what if not. It wants to live from, even with fear, I did it. That's the new you that you're cultivating. One that doesn't deny its doubts, but doesn't obey them either. One that feels fear, but doesn't give up. Friend, one who knows that doubt isn't the problem. The problem is surrendering to it. And if you've made it this far, I tell you clearly, you are no longer alone. Not because you read me, but because you are finally listening to yourself. And that changes everything. Fear as a learned mental habit. You were never born with fear. You were born clean, naked, and brave. You were born hungry to touch, to explore, to taste, to climb, to fall, to cry, to scream. Fear was not part of your nature. It was part of the world around you. It was handed to you like a heavy cloak the day you started asking questions, the day you wanted to try something different, and someone looked at you with concern, shouted careful, told you can't, or simply made you feel that you were too much to try and too little to achieve. That's how you inherited it. Like an emotional disease passed down through generations, like a pattern embedded in your mind, not out of malice, but through repetition. You learned to be afraid, just as you learned to speak, through examples, through warnings, through glances that didn't believe in you. And without realizing it, fear became part of your operating system. It's no coincidence that you're afraid to say what you think, to be vulnerable, to fail, to succeed, to step outside the box. You were trained for that, and the more you repeated it, the more natural it felt. That's how a habit forms, not because it's true, but because you practice it enough. Fear doesn't need reasons. It needs repetition. And you've practiced it so much that now you call it my way of being. But it's not. It's just a script you inherited and never questioned. When I understood this, everything changed. Because I no longer saw fear as an unmovable wall, but as a mental habit, an emotional custom that could be unlearned. Then I asked myself, what if I start training the opposite? What if, instead of reacting with fear, I practice responding with courage, with faith, with decision? And that's where my reprogramming began. Friends, I didn't start with the big things. I started with the small. I changed the way I spoke. I stopped saying, I can't, and started saying, I don't know yet, but I'm learning. I stopped using words that made me shrink. I stopped justifying myself. I started observing every automatic thought that led me to avoid something. Every time I thought, that's not for me, I'd stop and ask, where did I learn that? Who taught me I couldn't? Why do I keep obeying an idea that isn't even mine? The mind repeats what it hears most, and most of the time, what it hears most is fear. So I decided my mind would start listening to something new, something that would expand me, not diminish me. It was a daily, uncomfortable, repetitive process, like any habit, but it worked. Have you ever listened to your own thoughts out loud? Do it. Write them down. Read them as if you were another person. And then ask yourself, would someone who trusts themselves say this? Or would someone trained to obey fear say it? You'll be surprised, because even the thoughts you believe are yours often aren't. They are conditioning. As one of my mentors put it, you don't think, you repeat. And that phrase hurt my ego but freed my soul. Because if what I think is learned, then I can also learn to think differently. And that's what I did. I replaced every thought of fear with an affirmation of power. Not magically, but strategically. Every time fear said, "You won't be able to," I replied, "I'm learning how." Every time it said, "You'll fall," I replied, "And if I fall, I'll get back up." Learn fear is an uninstall with motivation. It's uninstall with repeated action, with new habits, with conscious choices. That's why every morning I'd ask myself, today, what would someone who doesn't live from fear do? How would they walk? How would they speak? How would they act? And although at first everything felt awkward, over time it became natural. Because the habit of courage can also be trained. It's just that no one teaches us. They teach us to be afraid, but not to overcome it. They educate us to obey, not to trust our intuition. They mold us to be accepted, not to be authentic. But you're no longer a child. You no longer need to ask for permission. You no longer have to keep obeying a fear you didn't choose. I'm going to tell you something you might never have been told. You can choose your thoughts. And you don't need to believe them immediately. You just need to repeat them until your mind begins to obey your new truth. Because the mind doesn't differentiate between what's real and what's repeated. And if you can repeat fear, you can also repeat faith. If you can repeat guilt, you can also repeat power. If you can repeat limits, you can also practice possibilities. You are not your thoughts, but you are the one who observes them. And from that awareness, you can rebuild yourself. Like someone who has been hunched over for years begins to stretch. At first it hurts. At first you feel like you can't. But the body remembers, the soul remembers, and the mind can also remember its original state, freedom. Someone once asked me, what if all this fear is just part of who I am? And I replied without hesitation, it's part of who you learn to be, but it's not your essence. Your essence is power, decision, creation. Everything else are acquired mental habits. And like any habit, it can be transformed if you're willing to train yourself. If you're willing to sustain the process, if you're willing to stop protecting your programming with excuses. Because that's the other habit of fear, justification. We justify mediocrity, paralysis, procrastination as if they were conscious decisions. They're not. They're conditioned reflexes. And if you don't observe them, they devour you. Start by observing yourself. Listen to yourself. Question everything that smells of resignation. And then train yourself. Fear speaks differently. Decide differently. Surround yourself with people who speak to you as you want to think. Fear grows stronger in environments where everyone lives the same way, but it weakens when you expose yourself to those who already think differently. Change your habits. Change your thoughts. Change your relationships. Because nothing changes externally if you don't change internally. And you are ready. Not because you don't feel fear, but because you know that fear was learned, and everything learned can be unlearned. Today, I tell you, looking you in the eyes, as I did myself years ago, stop obeying the voice that wasn't born with you. Start listening to the one that was always there, but was silenced by the habits you inherited. That voice knows what you want, knows what you deserve, and above all, knows who you are when you're not dominated by fear. Practice that. Repeat that. The most powerful habit you can build isn't working hard. It's thinking with freedom. Everything else follows. The religion of fear and punishment. There was a stage in my life when I believed that behaving well was synonymous with suffering. I believed that the more pain I carried, the closer I would be to divine favor. I was taught to fear eternal punishment more than to honor my freedom. I was taught that God saw everything, but not as a loving presence, but as a watchful eye with a blacklist. And I grew up with the certainty that any joy could be suspect, that if something went well, I had to pay for it with guilt. They call that faith, but it was fear. I didn't understand it at first. I would kneel, cry, ask for forgiveness for thoughts I hadn't even turned into actions. I lived watching myself, as if everything human were a sin. I became an expert at self-punishment, at suppressing my desires, at judging my emotions. I thought that was spirituality, but it was emotional slavery disguised as religion. One day, after months of emotional silence, I understood that fear had settled within me, not just as a habit, but as a sacred belief system. It wasn't just an emotion, it was doctrine. It had been carved into me like stone. If you do this, God will turn away. If you think this, you are not worthy. If you make a mistake, prepare to pay. And I began to question why a loving God would need me to feel guilty to obey. Why a supreme creator would delight in seeing his creation fear him. The answer was like a breaking point. It wasn't God who demanded that fear from me. It was a human system that needed control, because those who are afraid obey. Those who feel guilty submit. Those who believe they are unworthy do not claim their power. The religion of fear and punishment has educated entire generations to believe that spirituality is suffering, that if something goes wrong, it's because you're paying for something, that if you're happy, it's best not to celebrate too loudly because a test will surely come. This thought runs so deep in us that even when everything is going well, we feel that something must go wrong because we were programmed to distrust life, to distrust God, to distrust ourselves. And that's when I understood the trap. Fear paralyzes more from the pulpit than from prison because it's invisible, because it disguises itself as virtue, because it pretends to be humility. But it is terror, and terror does not create. It only limits. The most destructive aspect of this mindset is that it not only distances us from ourselves, but turns us into executioners of others. We begin to judge, to point fingers, to classify as sinner anyone who dares to think differently, to love differently, to seek God from another path. Today, we believe that defending an idea is more important than honoring compassion. And so, we become temples of fear, not channels of love. Until one day, the soul screams, "What am I doing? Who am I obeying? Why do I feel like being myself is a sin?" And that day, true spirituality begins, the kind that doesn't force you to live on your knees, but with consciousness, the kind that isn't based on fear of punishment, but on connection with the divine that dwells within you. I had to unlearn. I had to break invisible pacts with ideas I revered as truth. I had to tell myself, God is not interested in me repressing myself. He is interested in me liberating myself. He is not waiting for me to fail to punish me. He is waiting for me to trust that I am already complete. And as I began to live this way, everything changed. I stopped asking permission to exist. I stopped negotiating with guilt. I stopped hiding my talents for fear of being arrogant. I began to see myself as a living extension of the divine source. And I understood that if that source lives in me, then I don't need to fear it. I need to express it. Ask yourself honestly, how many decisions have you avoided for fear of distancing yourself from God? How many times have you silenced what you feel for fear of sinning? How many times have you doubted your desires because you believe they were impure? Who defined that for you? Who wrote that mental script you've been obeying for years without reviewing it? Because a faith based on fear does not liberate. It subjugates. A spirituality based on guilt does not transform. It poisons. And if the God you believe in makes you feel smaller than the world, then you are not believing in God. You are believing in a reflection of your own internal punishments. But you are no longer a child. You no longer need to ask for permission. You no longer have to keep obeying a fear you didn't choose. I'm going to tell you something you might never have been told. You can choose your thoughts. And you don't need to believe them immediately. You just need to repeat them until your mind begins to obey your new truth. Because the mind doesn't differentiate between what's real and what's repeated. And if you can repeat fear, you can also repeat faith. If you can repeat guilt, you can also repeat power. If you can repeat limits, you can also practice possibilities. You are not your thoughts, but you are the one who observes them. And from that awareness, you can rebuild yourself. Like someone who's been hunched over for years begins to stretch. At first it hurts. At first you feel like you can't. But the body remembers, the soul remembers, and the mind can also remember its original state, freedom. Someone once asked me, what if all this fear is just part of who I am? And I replied without hesitation, it's part of who you learn to be, but it's not your essence. Your essence is power, decision, creation. Everything else are acquired mental habits. And like any habit, It can be transformed if you're willing to train yourself, if you're willing to sustain the process, if you're willing to stop protecting your programming with excuses. Because that's the other habit of fear, justification. We justify mediocrity, paralysis, procrastination as if they were conscious decisions. They're not. They're conditioned reflexes. And if you don't observe them, they devour you. Start by observing yourself. Listen to yourself. Question everything that smells of resignation. And then train yourself. Fear speaks differently. Decide differently. Surround yourself with people who speak to you as you want to think. Fear grows stronger in environments where everyone lives the same way, but it weakens when you expose yourself to those who already think differently. Change your habits. Change your thoughts. Change your relationships. Because nothing changes externally if you don't change internally. And you are ready. Not because you don't feel fear, but because you know that fear was learned, and everything learned can be unlearned. Today, I tell you, looking you in the eyes, as I did myself years ago, stop obeying the voice that wasn't born with you. Start listening to the one that was always there, but was silenced by the habits you inherited. That voice knows what you want, knows what you deserve, and above all, knows who you are when you are not dominated by fear. Practice that. Repeat that. The most powerful habit you can build isn't working hard. It's thinking with freedom. Everything else follows. The religion of fear and punishment. There was a stage in my life when I believed that behaving well was synonymous with suffering. I believed that the more pain I carried, the closer I would be to divine favor. I was taught to fear eternal punishment more than to honor my freedom. I was taught that God saw everything, but not as a loving presence, but as a watchful eye with a blacklist. And I grew up with the certainty that any joy could be suspect, that if something went well, I had to pay for it with guilt. They called that faith, but it was fear. I didn't understand it at first. I would kneel, cry, ask for forgiveness for thoughts I hadn't even turned into actions. I lived watching myself, as if everything human were a sin. I became an expert at self-punishment, at suppressing my desires, at judging my emotions. I thought that was spirituality, but it was emotional slavery disguised as religion. One day, after months of emotional silence, I understood that fear had settled within me, not just as a habit, but as a sacred belief system. It wasn't just an emotion, it was doctrine. It had been carved into me like stone. If you do this, God will turn away. If you think this, you are not worthy. If you make a mistake, prepare to pay. And I began to question why a loving God would need me to feel guilty to obey. Why a supreme creator would delight in seeing his creation fear him. The answer was like a breaking point. It wasn't God who demanded that fear from me. It was a human system that needed control. Because those who are afraid obey. Those who feel guilty submit. Those who believe they are unworthy do not claim their power. The religion of fear and punishment has educated entire generations to believe that spirituality is suffering, that if something goes wrong, it's because you're paying for something, that if you're happy, it's best not to celebrate too loudly, because a test will surely come. This thought runs so deep in us that even when everything is going well, we feel that something must go wrong, because we were programmed to distrust life, to distrust God, to distrust ourselves. And that's when I understood the trap. Fear paralyzes more from the pulpit than from prison, because it's invisible, because it disguises itself as virtue, because it pretends to be humility. But it is terror, and terror does not create. It only limits. The most destructive aspect of this mindset is that it not only distances us from ourselves, but turns us into executioners of others. We begin to judge, to point fingers, to classify as sinner anyone who dares to think differently, to love differently, to seek God from another path. Today, we believe that defending an idea is more important than honoring compassion. And so, we become temples of fear, not channels of love. Until one day, the soul screams, "What am I doing? Who am I obeying? Why do I feel like being myself is a sin?" And that day, true spirituality begins, the kind that doesn't force you to live on your knees, but with consciousness, the kind that isn't based on fear of punishment, but on connection with the divine that dwells within you. I had to unlearn. I had to break invisible pacts with ideas I revered as truth. I had to tell myself, God is not interested in me repressing myself. He is interested in me liberating myself. He is not waiting for me to fail to punish me. He is waiting for me to trust that I am already complete. And as I began to live this way, everything changed. I stopped asking permission to exist. I stopped negotiating with guilt. I stopped hiding my talents for fear of being arrogant. I began to see myself as a living extension of the divine source. And I understood that if that source lives in me, then I don't need to fear it. I need to express it. Ask yourself honestly, how many decisions have you avoided for fear of distancing yourself from God? How many times have you silenced what you feel for fear of sinning? How many times have you doubted your desires because you believed they were impure? Who defined that for you? Who wrote that mental script you've been obeying for years without reviewing it? Because a faith based on fear does not liberate. It subjugates. A spirituality based on guilt does not transform. It poisons. And if the God you believe in makes you feel small in the world, then you are not believing in God. You are believing in a reflection of your own internal punishments. And here's something vital. The system that taught you to fear can also teach you to love. But you must take the helm. You must consciously choose which belief builds you up and which enslaves you. Because not all teachings are wisdom. Some are just ancient chains that no one dare to cut. But you can. You can love without guilt. You can shine without apologizing. You can make mistakes without fearing punishment. You can trust without fear of being deceived. You can connect with your divine self without feeling unworthy. Because the sacred is not in fear, but in authenticity, in the courageous act of looking at yourself with love and saying, I'm learning, I'm growing, and that is enough. One of my mentors once told me, you cannot love a God you were taught to fear, but you can reconnect with a God who teaches you to trust yourself. And that phrase stuck with me. Why? Because if God is love, why do we base our relationship with him on fear? Would you love someone who punishes you for thinking differently, who makes you feel less of being yourself? Then why do we accept that in the name of spirituality? It's time to rebuild the bridge, not to deny your faith, but to heal it, to make it intimate, to make it freedom, to make it a source of power, not guilt. Start by questioning what makes you feel confined. Speak to your soul. Ask it what it needs to heal. Is your faith a source of peace or fear? Is your spirituality an expression of expansion or a mental prison? Does love allow you to live in joy? Or does it make you live in emotional debt? These questions are not meant to destroy, but to purify. Because sometimes the most authentic faith emerges when you dare to dismantle the one you inherited out of fear. And if you've made it this far, it wasn't by chance. It was because a part you already knows that punishment is unnecessary, that fear is not a guide, that the soul does not blossom in repressed silence, but in the clear voice of one who is no longer willing to live fearing love. You know that you were not created to beg for redemption, but to embody your divinity with every free act. The true temple is your awakened consciousness. The true altar is your action aligned with your truth. And the true act of faith is to trust that God does not demand you suffer, but to live fully, with joy, with purpose, with truth, without guilt, without chains, without fear. The fear of failure and the fear of standing out. I never understood it until I lived it. There are people who don't act for fear of failure, and others who don't dare for fear of shining. I was both. And when I discovered that it wasn't a lack of talent that trapped me, but two opposing fears feeding each other, I began to liberate myself. The first was clear, the fear of failure, the fear of trying and losing everything, the fear that the world would see I wasn't enough, that I wasn't prepared, that I wasn't as smart as I pretended. This fear told me, don't start, don't risk it, don't make a fool of yourself. And many times I obeyed, but the second fear was quieter, more cunning. The fear of standing out, of excelling, of everything going so well that my life would no longer be what I knew. This fear whispered, are you sure you can handle it? What if they envy you? What if they demand more from you? What if you lose your freedom? It terrified me to be invisible, but it also paralyzed me to be seen. It terrified me to fail, but I also feared the price of success. One day, I looked at myself in the mirror and asked, so, what would happen if today I did what I really want? If I stopped hiding? If I acted as someone who is already ready? And the answer was a relief. It was anxiety. Because doing it meant losing excuses, stopping justifying my mediocrity, taking on my power without further delay. But it was easier to say, I'm not ready yet, than to say, yes, I can, and now I must take responsibility for my greatness. But that's the trap. We think we only fear mistakes when, in reality, we are also afraid of the possibility of succeeding and losing it, or of sustaining it and transforming so much that we no longer recognize our lives. It's no coincidence that just as you're about to make the most important leap, your mind throws thoughts like, what if it goes well, but you don't know how to handle it? What if people start talking about you? What if your friends no longer fit in with you? What if you stop being your old self? These questions don't come from failure. They come from the fear of leaving behind the zone where your soul was dormant. Because standing out hurts when you've been trained to fit in, when you've grown up learning that excelling is provocative, that being different is dangerous, that being excellent is threatening to those who haven't yet given themselves permission to shine. That's how you learn to stay just below your true potential. Not to bother anyone, not to be judged, not to lose your place among those you love. But that's also a form of failure. A failure disguised as loyalty, a betrayal of your purpose with the excuse of humility. I got tired of that. I got tired of pretending I didn't know what I wanted. I got tired of hiding my ideas for fear someone would steal or attack them. I got tired of shrinking in spaces where I knew I could lead. Today, I got tired of waiting for everyone to be comfortable with my growth to keep growing. And I told myself, if I have to choose between inconveniencing the world or betray myself, I choose to inconvenience the world. Because my soul didn't come to please, it came to expand. And that decision was the most liberating I ever made. Because I understood that standing out isn't arrogance. It's obedience to your inner calling. And that success isn't ego. It's a natural consequence of someone doing what they came to do with passion, focus, and truth. But I also understood that you can't live fully if you keep obeying both fears. The fear of failure makes you invisible. The fear of success makes you an imposter. The first one extinguishes you. The second sabotages you. And if you let them live together, you become a brilliant prisoner with a broken key. So, if today you feel stuck, ask yourself, do I truly fear failure? Or do I fear triumphing and no longer have an excuse that I'm not enough? Do I fear criticism if things go wrong? Or do I fear abandonment if things go well? Am I afraid of falling or of having to fly without a manual? The answer won't always be obvious. Sometimes it's hidden behind false humility, an emotionless routine, a constant need for approval. And here's a key. The fear of failure is cured with imperfect action. You do something, you fail, you correct, you advance. The fear of success is cured with identity. Because if you don't know who you are when things go well, you won't be able to sustain what you achieve. That's why it's not enough to conquer the fear of losing. You have to heal your relationship with winning. Don't just ask if you can get there. Ask if you can stay. If you can sustain yourself without sabotaging yourself. If you can receive without feeling guilty. If you can succeed without feeling you're betraying anyone. And that is only achieved with profound decision. To choose to be yourself without fear of the consequences. I remember when, for the first time, I started speaking my truth without softening it, without embellishing it. The initial reactions weren't pleasant. Some people distanced themselves. Others criticized me. Many looked at me as if I had betrayed something. But I felt free. I felt whole. Because there was no greater peace than knowing that what I was doing was authentic. That I no longer had to pretend I wasn't capable. That I could honor my light without having to dim anyone else's. But also without hiding my own. Because I learned something invaluable. Shining is not a threat to those who are ready, only to those who haven't yet given themselves permission to do so. And if you're at that point, if you know you're avoiding taking that step because you're afraid to fall or fly too high, I tell you this. Do it anyway, not out of bravery, but out of dignity. And not to prove anything to anyone, but to stop postponing the life you know belongs to you. Because if you don't do it, someone else will. And not because you couldn't, but because you didn't dare. And that, over time, hurts more than any failure. Because failure hurts for a while. Surrender hurts the soul. So now, look closely at me, as if we were face to face. What are you waiting for to accept that you are capable of more? What are you waiting for to stop hiding who you are? Why do you insist on living in half-light when you know you were born to ignite fires in everything you touch? If you stand out, so be it. If you fail, so be that too. But don't ever stay in the same place again for fear of breaking an image. The image can be repaired. The soul that refuses to live, not always. Because in the end, it's not about winning or losing. It's about living with the awareness that you were loyal to your truth, even if you trembled. And that is true success. It's the kind no one can take from you. Not the world, not your fears, not your shadows. Only you can deny it to yourself. But also, only you can claim it. Do it without permission, without guilt, and without fear. The fear of being yourself. There's a kind of fear almost no one talks about, because it's not as noticeable as a fear of failure, nor is it celebrated like the fear of shining. It's quieter, more intimate, deeper. The fear of being yourself. The fear of showing up as you truly are, with your raw ideas, your broken emotions, your different beliefs, your unique ways of loving, thinking, seeing the world. Because although everyone claims they want authenticity, few are prepared to sustain it. And when you dare to be yourself, you not only risk criticism, you risk loss. The loss of the persona you built to please, the loss of relationships that only knew a fabricated version of you, the loss of the comfort that comes with fitting in. And that price, though invisible, is heavy. I lived for a long time in that persona, the one who knew what to say not to inconvenience, the one who laughed when they should, the one who bowed their head in meetings, the one who said yes even when a violent no burned inside. I confused myself with that character. I believed I was him, until one day I got tired of sustaining it, not because I was brave, but because I was exhausted. Being someone else, even if they applaud you, is tiring. And that's where my true struggle began, not with the world, but with the idea of myself that I had manufactured, that mask that served to survive, but not to truly live. And when I started to take it off, I felt fear, a visceral, almost childish fear, as if I was going to be punished for ceasing to be what everyone expected. I asked myself, what will happen if I show my true way of thinking? If I stop pretending I'm not hurting? If I say I don't believe in certain rules? If I dress, speak, and decide as someone who no longer wants to please anyone but my soul? Will they still love me? Will they still accept me? Will they still be there? But then I understood that those weren't the right questions. The true question was, can I live in peace knowing that I betrayed myself for fear of not being accepted? Because the true prison isn't the one the world imposes on you. It's the one you keep locked from within with the key of fear. And that prison has bars made of other people's opinions, inherited rules, comfortable silences. One day, while reading about how fear becomes a habit, I stumbled upon this idea. The strongest person is the one who dares to be who they are, even if they end up alone. That phrase pierced me, because I understood that every time I succumbed to my fear of being myself, I was giving away my freedom. And no one should have that much power. Not your family, not your friends, not your partner, not your religion, not your society. Because who you are is the most sacred thing you possess. And if that is negotiated for acceptance, what you receive is not love, it's disguised tolerance. And you didn't come here to be tolerated. You came to be lived fully, with your light and your shadow, with your certainty and your contradiction, with your faith and your doubt, without apologizing for existing. Today, there's something I discovered amidst that transformation. Being yourself isn't just an act of courage. It's an act of respect. Respect for your soul, for your story, for what your intuition screams to you at night when the whole world sleeps. It's also an act of humility, because you stop believing you must please to be loved, and you start trusting that being yourself unfiltered is enough. And when you act from that truth, everything changes. Yes, you lose some things, but what comes next is worth every surrender. People arrive who recognize you without needing explanations. Opportunities arise that resonate with your purpose. A peace descends that no longer depends on approval. And above all, a freedom arrives that no one can ever snatch from you, because it's no longer external. But this isn't achieved overnight. It's a work of brutal honesty. Looking at what you hide, asking when you stop being yourself, at what age you decide it was safer to act, which part of yourself you locked away to be loved, and most importantly, Am I willing to reclaim it, even if it means starting over? Because that's another uncomfortable truth. When you decide to be yourself, you often have to rebuild from scratch, relationships, habits, vision. But that rebuilding is no longer out of obligation. It's by choice. It's from the soul, and that changes everything. I remember when one day I sat across from someone I loved and said, "This is who I am. This is what I think. This is what I believe. I know it's not what you expected, but I can't keep pretending." I trembled inside, but something within me also bloomed, because in that moment, I wasn't just talking to that person. I was talking to my own history. I was signing a new pact with myself, one that said, from now on, I will only form alliances for my truth, even if it hurts, even if I'm left alone, even if I have to start over. And that pact transformed me. It didn't make me invincible. It made me integral, because now, when someone asks me what I think, I respond without strategy. When someone tells me they don't agree, I smile without feeling threatened. When someone walks away, I no longer run after them, because I learned that not everyone deserves a real version of me. Only those who can receive without trying to correct, only those who don't feel that my freedom is a threat. And the most beautiful thing is that when you start being yourself without fear, you give others permission to do the same. You become a mirror that says, it's possible to live without masks. It's not just possible, it's urgent. So, if today you feel you're hiding a part of yourself, don't wait for the world to approve. Don't wait for it to be safe. Don't wait for everyone to understand, because that moment may never come. And if you keep waiting, you'll live decades being someone you're not, just to be loved by people who don't know you. Is it worth it? Is acceptance worth more than peace? Is belonging worth more than authenticity? Life is waiting for you, but not for your edited version. It's waiting for you, raw, human, real. If you have to cry, cry. If you have to say, I don't believe in this, say it. If you have to change paths, change them. But don't keep denying who you are for fear of not fitting in. Because what makes you distinct is exactly what you came to offer, and no one else can do it for you. No one else can be you, not even you, if you keep being someone else out of fear. How fear sabotages your inner voice. What hurts most isn't failing. It's not losing. It's not making mistakes. What hurts most is betraying yourself. Ignoring that inner voice that speaks softly when everything outside screams the opposite. It's that voice that doesn't impose, that doesn't need logical explanations, that simply feels. We all have it. Some call it intuition. Others call it soul, conscience, divine guidance. But whatever you call it, you know it's there. The problem isn't that you don't hear it. It's that fear learned to speak louder. Fear took the microphone of your mind and began to imitate its tone. It started creeping between genuine whispers, disguised as logic, prudence, responsibility, until one day you no longer knew which voice was yours and which was fear's, and you stopped trusting yourself. It happened to me many times. I knew what I should do. I felt it. It was clear. It wasn't rational, but it was real. But then fear would come and tell me, what if you're not ready? What if you're deceiving yourself? What if you mess everything up? Better wait. Better ask someone else. And then I'd doubt, I'd back away, I'd stop. Until one day, after many years of inconsistent decisions, I asked myself, why do I need so many signals to do what I already know I want? Why do I seek so much proof if there's already a certainty inside? And why, if my soul says yes, does my mind scream caution? And I understood, because fear has become more credible than myself. Because I gave it so much power that I no longer know if what I feel is truth or a trap disguised as protection. That's when I remembered a teaching that changed my life. Fear is not a guide, it's a signal. It's not there for you to follow it. It's there for you to observe it. Every time fear appears, there's a door, not a wall. A door. But if you believe fear is truth, you close that door without even touching it. And you do it again and again until that inner voice, the true one, begins to fall silent. Not because it dies out, but because you stop paying attention to it. And when you no longer trust your voice, you start depending on everything else. The noise, the approval, the advice, the methods. And you get lost because you no longer know if what you're doing comes from you or from your conditioning. So, How do you recover that voice? How do you learn to trust what you truly feel again? The first step is to accept that fear won't disappear. It's not about eliminating it. It's about recognizing it and stopping obeying it. Because fear will always speak. Yes, but you can choose who you listen to. Do you listen to the one who says, protect yourself, or the one who says, advance? Even if you tremble, that choice changes everything. I started small. Every day I'd ask a simple question. Am I doing this out of love or out of fear? Does this decision expand me or confine me? Is this conversation coming from my truth or from my need to please? And sometimes the answer hurt, but it hurt more to keep ignoring it. I started writing what I felt, not what I thought. What I felt. I'd sit in silence and listen without judgment. At first it was confusing, but little by little, the voice returned, soft, deep, non-negotiable. It told me when to speak, when to be silent, when to insist, when to let go. Not with words, but with certainty. That certainty that doesn't shout but moves the body, opens the chest, brings peace even when there's risk. And I began to live from there. Not always perfectly, but increasingly aligned. Because alignment isn't doing everything right. It's doing what is yours, even if others don't understand, even if it's not popular, even if no one validates it. The inner voice is like a muscle. If you don't use it, it atrophies. If you ignore it, it weakens. But if you listen to it, even in the smallest things, it strengthens. And when it does, you don't need so much externally, because you're no longer searching for what to do. You're remembering what you already knew, and that makes you free. But to get there, you need courage. The courage to disappoint expectations, the courage to seem irrational, the courage to fail by following your truth and not someone else's. Because that another sabotage your fear, making you believe it's better to make a mistake obeying than to make a mistake being yourself. And it's preferable to fail from your truth than to succeed on a path that isn't yours. Because authentic failure teaches you. Borrowed success empties you. Once, a person I admired told me, intuition is your direct connection to what is unseen. And if you sabotage it, you disconnect from yourself, from life, and from everything you could be. And that phrase shook me because I understood that it wasn't just about decisions. It was about identity, about not living a borrowed life for fear of honoring my own, about not building castles for others while abandoning my inner home. And since then, I decided no more internal betrayals, no more comfortable silences, no more choices based on what will people say. I started living from what burns within me, from what calls me, from what I can't explain but know is mine. And that's when I finally began to live, not survive, not adapt, but live. If you feel that inner voice is silenced, listen closely. It's not dead. It's just waiting for you to stop ignoring it, to stop silencing it with excuses, to stop hiding it behind fear, because it doesn't need to be validated. It just needs to be heard. And when you do, you'll be amazed by all you already know, by all you always knew, by all your soul screamed while your mind convinced you to stay where you didn't belong. The inner voice doesn't need force. It needs space. It needs silence. It needs you to trust that what you don't understand now will make sense later. Because that voice doesn't guide you towards what's easy. It guides you towards what's real. And what's real, even if uncomfortable, always liberates. Don't keep giving away your decisions to a fear that learn to speak in your tone. Return to yourself. Return to that sacred frequency where nothing is explained, but everything is understood, where there are no external certainties, but an inner truth that no one can snatch from you. Not fear, not failure, not the past. Only you can silence it, but also only you can make it blossom. Listen, you are closer to yourself than you think. You just need to remember what your soul sounds like when fear falls silent. Fear is mental energy. Transmute it. I didn't know fear was energy. I didn't see it that way. I saw it as an enemy to be suppressed, eliminated, vanished. But the more I fought it, the stronger it became. It attacked me from within, disguised as anxiety, insomnia, rage, exhaustion. I thought something was wrong with me, that I shouldn't feel that it was a spiritual flaw. But it wasn't that. It was stagnant energy. It was frozen life waiting to be moved. Fear is unexpressed movement. It's fire that finds no channel. It's electricity without a ground. That's why it burns. That's why it sickens. That's why it screams. Not to harm you, but for you to release it. And that's where it all began. When I understood that fear wasn't a wall, it was a force waiting to be directed. Someone asked me, what if fear were just a sign that there's power within you that you're not using? And that question disarmed me, because it made sense. Why does fear appear precisely when you're about to act, to advance, to say what you've never said, to change what you've always tolerated? Why doesn't it appear when you're on autopilot, resigned, subdued? Because fear doesn't come to halt your light. It comes to test if you're ready to sustain it. And if you don't understand, you sabotage yourself. You believe that because you're trembling, you must stop. But the trembling is the warning that the energy is alive, that it's accumulating, that it wants to pass. And if you don't let it, it explodes inside. But if you channel it, it becomes power. I learned to transmute fear when I stopped being afraid of it, when I stopped seeing it as the end, and began to see it as a beginning. I felt it in my chest like a knot, like a pressure. Instead of fleeing, I breathed into it. I closed my eyes and said, this, too, is energy, and I'm going to move it. Sometimes I'd talk to myself, walk forcefully, yell in a safe place, write until my hands hurt, or dance until my body sweated out the emotion. The important thing was not to repress, not to rationalize, not to bury. Because every time you hide your fear, you also hide your strength. Transmutation isn't mystical. It's practical. It's emotional alchemy. You take an emotion and turn it into fuel. You take a shadow and use it as power. You take a thought of failure and rewrite it with courage. And no, it doesn't always feel pretty, but it feels alive. And living from there is different, because you no longer flee. You no longer deny yourself. You no longer hide. You confront. You speak to yourself. You listen to yourself. And from there, you act. Not from fear, but from the energy that fear released. Once, in a moment of great pressure, I felt everything crashing down. Business, relationships, faith, everything. I was paralyzed. I was filled with thoughts like, you won't make it. This is too big for you. Better stop. But instead of obeying them, I asked myself, who's speaking here? The self that was built to advance, or the fear that wants to avoid change? And I decided not to react, just to observe, to breathe, to let that energy do its thing without controlling it. That night, I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I screamed. I emptied myself. And in that vulnerability, I discovered a new strength. Not the strength of persona, not the strength of success, but the strength of one who dares to stay with oneself when everything is burning. The next day, without thinking, I made decisions. I called who I needed to call. I closed cycles. I opened paths. Not because I was no longer afraid, but because fear no longer dominated me. Because I understood that the energy that scared me was the same energy that could set me free. And so it was. From that moment on, every time fear appears, I no longer flee. I stop. I observe it. I thank it. And I use it. Because behind every fear is a direction, a truth, a key, an expansion. You just have to dare to touch it. I want you to ask yourself something now, looking at yourself with sincerity. What are you doing with your fear? Are you burying it, denying it, turning it into an excuse? Or are you recognizing it and transmuting it? Because every fear has a message. It's telling you where there's blocked energy, where there's untold truth, where there's repressed desire. It's not your enemy, it's your teacher. But only if you listen, only if you stop rejecting it, only if you decide to move with it instead of against it. And yes, this requires practice. It requires emotional courage. It requires sitting with yourself without judgment, breathing in the midst of chaos, choosing a new response. But the beautiful thing is that every time you do it, you reclaim a part of yourself, a fragment you had surrendered out of fear, a power you had hidden to survive. And you become more you, more real, more free, more potent. The key is to understand this. The energy of fear and the energy of desire come from the same place. It's just that fear blocks and desire pushes. If you paralyze, that energy rots. But if you channel it, it transforms into impulse, into vision, into creation. So when your soul trembles, Don't run. Breathe. Recognize. Move. Speak. Scream if necessary. Cry if needed. But don't repress. Don't extinguish yourself. Because your fear also wants to serve you. It just needs a purpose. Start today. Choose a situation where fear is screaming and don't escape. Sit facing it as if it were an old friend. Ask it, what are you showing me? What part of me wants to be born? What energy am I blocking? And then act, not from reaction, but from transformation. Do something small that represents a new path, a call, a conversation, a change. Whatever it is, but do it, and you'll see how fear becomes fuel. You'll see how what used to hold you back now moves you. Because that's what transmuting is. Not denying the darkness, but illuminating it from within. Not fleeing your shadow, but turning it into form. Not waiting for it to stop hurting, but acting even if it burns. And believe me, that is the most powerful alchemy you can learn. Because it liberates you. Because it elevates you. Because it turns you into the creator of your own mind. Fear is energy. You decide if you use it to build yourself or to keep running from yourself. How to eliminate the fear of economic failure. This fear isn't felt in the heart. It's felt in the stomach, like a stone that won't let you breathe, like an invisible pressure that doesn't go away even when the day has gone well. It's the fear of not having, of not making it, of not reaching, of seeing your account at zero and your faith even lower. It doesn't matter if you have a job or not, if you earn well or poorly, if you're young or old. The fear of economic failure settles in like an uninvited guest and begins to occupy every corner of your mind. Your decisions, your dreams, your relationship with money, even your self-esteem. Because it doesn't tell you that you don't have. It tells you that you aren't. You're not enough. You're not smart. You're not worthy. You're not capable. You're not free. And you believe it because you feel it. I believed it too for years. Money was an emotional prison. Not because I didn't have moments of abundance, but because I didn't trust myself to sustain it. I felt that any move could ruin everything, that I shouldn't enjoy it, that if I had it, I had protected with fear, and if I lost it, I had to blame myself without mercy. I lived thinking about debts before they even existed. I sabotaged myself in decisions that could have elevated me. Just because, what if it doesn't work out? What if I go into debt? What if I fail? But one day, I'd had enough. I was tired of living defensively. I was tired of measuring my worth by what was in my pocket. I was tired of fearing something that wasn't even real yet. So I sat with myself. I was alone, without distractions, without excuses, and I asked myself, what is economic failure really? Losing money? Running out of income? Living with less? Starting from scratch? But none of that was the real fear. What hurt was what I believed it said about me. Economic failure in my mind was synonymous with shame, humiliation, not being good enough, disappointing those who believed in me, having to ask for help, facing my wounded ego. And that's what truly paralyzes us. Not the money, the identity we attach to it, the idea that you're worth what you produce, that you are what you generate, that if you can't pay, you don't deserve an opinion. And that's when I started to dismantle everything, to break the invisible threads. Because financial reality is one thing, and your financial mindset is another. You can have no money and feel abundant. You can have money and still feel poor. Because real wealth doesn't start in your bank account. It starts in your belief system, in your way of seeing the world, in your emotional relationship with uncertainty, and that you can change, even if you don't have a penny today. One of the phrases that helped me understand this the most was, poverty is a state of mind that manifests when fear takes control of your economic decisions. And that was me. I wasn't poor. I thought like a poor person. I wasn't failure. I acted like someone afraid to fail. I wasn't weak. I had forgotten to trust myself when everything seemed to crumble. So I decided to redefine everything. To redefine what winning was, what failing was, what having was, what needing was. And I realized that what I needed most wasn't money. It was faith. Not faith in the universe or luck or miracle, but faith in my ability to adapt, to learn, to get back up, because no one fails by losing money. You fail when you surrender to the idea that you can't create again. You fail when you stop trying for fear of making a mistake. You fail when you believe your destiny is out of your control. But when you understand that you are the source, that money is merely an expression of your focused energy, that what you give comes back if you give with awareness, then you no longer fear, because you know that even if you fall, you can get up wiser, because you know you don't depend on the global economy or a boss or an algorithm. You depend on your faith in yourself, on your willingness not to give up. And that's when the change began. I started making decisions from expansion, not contraction. I started saying yes to opportunities that scared me but felt right. I started moving money with gratitude, not attachment. I started talking to money as if it were an ally, not a judge. I started seeing myself as someone who not only deserved to prosper, but was obligated to do so to show others that it is possible. And little by little, fear lost its grip, not because it disappeared, but because it no longer directed me. I use it as a signal, not a limit. And if you're wondering how to do it yourself, here's how. Start by questioning the narrative you received about money. Were you told it was scarce, dirty, only for the bad guys, that you have to suffer to earn it? All that forms your unconscious programming. And until you change it, fear will continue to govern you. Then, review how you talk about yourself when you talk about money. Do you tell yourself, it's never enough for me, I'm a mess, this isn't for me? Every word shapes your reality. You don't just create what you do, you create what you affirm. And if what you affirm is loaded with scarcity, that's what you'll see, even if you have nothing. Next, do something small but symbolic. Invest in yourself, even if it's a little, in a course, a book, an experience that elevates you. Do it with love, not guilt, with certainty, not fear. And repeat to yourself, money flows to me in direct proportion to my faith, my focus, and my willingness to serve for my truth. And I repeated that phrase until I believed it. And when I believed it, everything started to change. Not overnight, but with a consistency I hadn't known before. Today, I'm not speaking to you as someone who has achieved everything. I'm speaking to you as someone who learned that the fear of economic failure is just an illusion built on lies we accept as truths. And that, yes, you can live without that fear. That, yes, you can be free. That, yes, you can trust that what you give comes back and that what you create from the soul prospers. So, look at yourself in the mirror without excuses and ask, how many decisions are you avoiding for fear of losing? How many dreams are you postponing for fear of failing? How much power have you given away for fear of not having? And now, decide, will you continue to let fear define you, or will you use it as the impulse to transform your relationship with money forever? You are not broken. You are remembering your power, and that right there is the beginning of true wealth. Invincible faith, your new mental shield. There comes a moment when you can no longer keep walking with fear, not because it disappears, but because it begins to hurt more to live paralyzed than to advance with uncertainty. And I reached that point. I felt suffocated, surrounded by thoughts screaming everything that could go wrong, everything out of my reach, everything I wasn't capable of controlling. It was as if my mind had turned into a courtroom, and every step was evaluated with invisible punishments. Until a voice, I don't know if it was internal or external, said something that both broke and opened me at the same time. Faith. Faith. That word I had used so many times without embodying it. Faith, not as religion, not as a wish, but faith as mental strength, as solid conviction, as certainty that asks for no proof, as an invisible shield that allows you to walk where others stop. There, I understood everything. Fear feeds on doubt, but faith is the only substance that weakens it from its roots, because it doesn't argue with it. It doesn't empower it. It simply ignores it and keeps going, not out of arrogance, but from a higher truth. Faith doesn't deny what's happening, but it doesn't let it become its limit. Faith doesn't need everything to be resolved, because it knows everything is being resolved. Faith isn't an emotion. It's a decision renewed every day, even when everything outside looks the same. So, how did I build that faith? It wasn't overnight. It was in fragments. In nights where no one saw me, I told myself, you didn't come here to give up. In days where everything was a loss, I still decided to move 1 more centimeter. In uncomfortable silences where I chose not to listen to the voice of failure, but to the voice of possibility. Because that's another thing. Faith isn't felt all the time. It's not euphoria or motivation. It's an internal structure. It's a root, an invisible ground, a low but firm voice that tells you, keep going, even if it hurts, even if you can't see, even if you don't understand. And for that, you have to re-educate your mind. Because if your mind is trained to expect the worst, your body will obey, your decisions will reflect it, your words will sow it, your life will confirm it. But if you start teaching your mind to think from faith, everything begins to change. How do you do that? First, by guarding your words. Because every time you say, I can't, that's too hard, it probably won't happen, you are affirming a reality that doesn't yet exist, but that you're building without realizing it. So I started correcting myself. I catch myself thinking and interrupt, that's not faith, that's fear disguised as logic. Then I'd ask myself, what would someone who believes in themselves say right now? And I'd say that, even if I didn't feel it yet, because language is creative, not reflective. Don't speak according to what you feel. Speak according to what you want to feel. Then, I observe who I listen to, because faith is cultivated in solitude, but it's contagious in community. If you surround yourself with people who only repeat tragedies, who only see the negative, who only sow distrust, your mental shield will crack. So I distance myself, not out of judgment, but out of spiritual hygiene. And I sought out voices that reminded me of who I could be, authors, mentors, even conversations with my future self. Because yes, I talked to him. And with that self was already overcome what I'm just facing. I ask him, how did you do it? And I listen, and I write, and I let myself be guided from there. And most importantly, I acted, because faith without action rots. Faith becomes fantasy. Faith is built in movement, however minimal, however clumsy. Because every step you take with faith strengthens you, convinces you, transforms you. You don't need everything to be aligned. You just need one real reason to keep going. Just one. I chose mine. I will not allow the fear of what might happen to destroy what I want to happen. And that became my banner. And every time I doubted, I reminded myself of it and moved forward. Sometimes trembling, sometimes crying, but I moved forward. And that's how I understood a truth I wish someone had told me sooner. Faith is the spiritual muscle of the soul. And like any muscle, it's trained through resistance. Life doesn't develop in comfort. It's forged in the days when nothing makes sense, and yet you choose to believe. In the days when everything fails and you choose to trust. In the days when the world screams, give up. And you respond with fierce, I'm not finished yet. That's faith. It's not a miracle. It's a practice. It's a stance. It's a decision not to surrender your mind to what appears to be, but to give it over to what you can create. And when you live from there, everything changes. Not because you stop having challenges, but because you no longer kneel before them. Because you no longer allow your mind to be a battlefield of fear. Because you no longer let doubt have the final word. Because now you know you have an invisible yet invincible shield. And every time fear tries to enter, you raise your faith like a gentle sword and simply say, not here. This mind now belongs to me. Today, I want you to say it too. Feel it. Etch it into every cell. Your mind doesn't belong to fear. It belongs to your vision, to your purpose, to your truth. And if you choose to live from there, every day will be an act of faith, an act of creation, an act of freedom. Because when faith becomes your shield, the world can roar, but you will no longer tremble. Because now you walk with a force that is unseen but transforms everything. And that, dear reader, can no longer be taken away. It is cultivated, honored, and expanded until you yourself become the proof that faith truly can do anything. And now that you made it this far, there's no turning back. Because one who recognizes their fear can no longer remain its slave. This wasn't a book to entertain you. It was a punch of truth to awaken you. And if something within you shuddered, use it. Don't fall back asleep. Don't settle. You have the power to rewrite every belief that made you small. Fear no longer has a place to hide. This audiobook has been created for educational and personal transformation purposes. It is not official material, but profound and adapted interpretation of the most powerful ideals regarding fear, and the mind, designed for you to truly understand and apply them in your life. This work has been exclusively produced by the Chronicle of Knowledge channel. If this resonated with you, I invite you to explore the complete playlist. There's more content designed to take you further, deeper, more awake. Remember, you didn't come here to survive. You came to conquer yourself. And now you know how.